Welcome, the haunted tales, brave souls, to a journey through the darkest trails in America. Hiking is meant to be a peaceful escape into nature, a retreat from the chaos of everyday life. But some trails hold more than just breathtaking views, they hold secrets. Unseen eyes watching from the trees, ghostly figures appearing just beyond the mist, and echoes of long-forgotten screams carried by the wind. Tonight, we step off the beaten path and into the unknown. These are the most haunted hikes in the United States. Stay close, and don't wander off the trail, the devil's tramping ground the locals always warned about, the barren circle deep in the woods of Chatham County. A place where nothing grew, where no animal dared to tread, and where, if you left anything overnight, it would be violently cast outside the circle by morning. They called it the devil's tramping ground. For most, it was just a legend, a piece of folklore passed down through generations. But for Adam and his friends, it was an irresistible challenge. Nothing happens out there. Adam scoffed as they packed up their camping gear. People just scare themselves. I bet we can sleep there all night without a problem. Bet you $20 we don't last, said Jake, his best friend, shaking his head. You remember what the old guy at the gas station said? He told us to stay away. Yeah, laughed Kayla, rolling her eyes. He also said the devil himself paces that circle at night, thinking up ways to drag souls to hell. Spooky, but come on, we're college students. We don't believe in fairy tales. With that, the trio piled into Adam's truck and set off into the dark North Carolina backroads. They arrived just after sunset. The clearing was exactly as described, a perfect, dead-end circle where no grass grew. It was as if something had scorched the earth long ago and left it cursed forever. Adam dropped his pack inside the circle and smirked. See? Just a patch of dirt. Nothing weird here. Jake, less sure, glanced at the surrounding trees. They loomed unnaturally, their gnarled branches reaching inward, as if desperate to block out whatever stood inside. Kayla took a few steps into the circle and shivered. It feels weird, though. Like we're being watched. Adam waved a dismissive hand. It's just your imagination. Let's set up camp. The fire was built just inside the circle. The three of them huddled around it, laughing, drinking, and roasting marshmallows. Hours passed, and nothing out of the ordinary happened, until Jake decided to test the legend. I'm putting my backpack in the center, he announced. If it's moved by morning, I'll eat my words. They all laughed as he placed the bag down, then settled into their sleeping bags, the fire dying into embers. Sometime after midnight, Kayla awoke to a strange sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling them. She turned her head slightly, afraid to look but unable to resist. The fire had almost gone out, leaving only a faint orange glow, but she could see something, a shape moving just beyond the light. She held her breath. Was it Adam or Jake? Maybe one of them had gotten up to relieve themselves. Then she heard it. A deep, rhythmic drag of something heavy against the ground, circling the camp. Shhhh. Kayla's heart pounded. She whispered, Adam? No answer. She reached out and shook Jake, who groaned but didn't wake. Then, mustering her courage, she sat up. The moment she did, the footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in around her. The woods were too quiet, no insects, no rustling leaves. Just the oppressive stillness. She turned toward where Jake had placed his backpack. It was gone. Her breath caught in her throat. A chill ran down her spine as something moved in the darkness just beyond the circle. A shadow, tall and spindly, with glowing red eyes. It stood at the very edge of the clearing, just beyond the ring where the grass refused to grow. Watching. Waiting. Kayla wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Then the whispering started, not in her ears, but inside her head. Leave, leave. Leave, she scrambled backward, shaking Adam and Jake awake. Get up! Get up! Jake groggily sat up, rubbing his eyes. What the hell, Kayla? The backpack is gone, she hissed. And there's something watching us. Adam, grumbling, turned over to look. His annoyed expression froze when he saw what she was pointing at. A single, bare footprint inside the circle. The three of them stared in horror. Adam swallowed. We need to go. Now. They grabbed their gear and sprinted to the truck. As soon as the headlights flooded the clearing, they saw it, Jake's backpack, torn open and flung outside the circle. They didn't stop to retrieve it. The ride back was silent, the air thick with terror. Only when they were safely back at Jake's apartment did they finally speak. You saw it too, right? Kayla whispered. Adam nodded, his face pale. Yeah. The shadow. The eyes. Jake's voice was hoarse. It was real. The legend, it's real. They never spoke of it again, and none of them ever went back to the devil's tramping ground, because now they knew the truth. The devil still walked that circle. And he was waiting for the next soul foolish enough to stay too long. Whispers on Bloody Lane. The sun hung low over Antietam battlefield, bleeding streaks of orange and red across the sky as Nathan Keller adjusted the straps of his backpack. His girlfriend, Lila, checked her phone for the 100th time, confirming their location on the map. I still don't see why we had to come here so late, she muttered, glancing over at the creeping shadows that lengthened along the Bloody Lane trail. Because, Nathan grinned, ghost stories only work when it's dark. We have to give the spirits a chance to show up. Bloody Lane, a sunken road that had turned into a mass grave during the Battle of Antietam, had been a site of death, horror, and endless whispers of the past. Over 5,000 soldiers had perished here in a single day, their bodies stacked like cordwood, blood soaking into the earth. People swore they could still hear gunfire, marching boots, and disembodied voices carried on the wind. Lila shook her head. This is how every horror movie starts. A dumb couple ignores the warning signs and... A branch snapped behind them. They both froze. Nathan turned slowly. The trail was empty. Just a dirt path, twisted trees, and the distant silhouette of the observation tower. Lila wrapped her arms around herself. Can we just walk a little faster? Nathan smirked but didn't argue. They continued along the winding path, their footsteps crunching over gravel and dry leaves. The eerie silence made the air feel thick, pressing against their skin. Then they heard it. A low murmur. Lila grabbed Nathan's arm. Did you hear that? Nathan swallowed hard. Probably the wind. The murmur grew louder. It wasn't the wind. It was voices. Faint, overlapping, whispering in a language either of them understood. Nathan turned on his phone flashlight, sweeping the beam over the trees and the uneven ground. Nothing. But the air smelled strange now, coppery, metallic, like rusted iron. Like blood, Lila whimpered. Nathan, let's go back. Nathan nodded, but before they could turn around, a sharp crack echoed through the night. A shadow darted between the trees. A soldier. For just a split second, they saw him, dressed in a tattered Confederate uniform, his face half gone, as if something had torn it away. His eyes were nothing but blackened sockets. Then he was gone. Lila screamed. Nathan grabbed her wrist, yanking her down the path. Move! Now! Their shoes pounded against the dirt as they ran. The whispers rose to a crescendo, overlapping voices crying out in agony. The sound of gunfire ripped through the night. Not distant. Close. Nathan dared a glance over his shoulder, and saw them. A line of soldiers stretched across the path, ghostly figures, some missing limbs, others with bullet wounds oozing spectral blood. Their mouths opened in silent screams as they raised their muskets. A blast of cold air slammed into Nathan's back. Lila tripped. Nathan skidded to a stop, grabbing for her, but invisible hands wrenched them apart. Lila was screaming. Nathan fought, twisting, reaching for her, but something yanked him backward. He hit the ground hard, gasping as unseen fingers closed around his throat. The night blurred. Darkness swallowed his vision. Then, everything stopped. Nathan opened his eyes. He was lying in the middle of the trail, gasping for breath. The air was still. Silent. Lila was beside him, shaking. What just happened? Nathan pushed himself up, his body trembling. The whispers were gone. The gunfire had stopped. The soldiers had vanished. A distant church bell tolled. The sky was still dark, but something had changed. The dirt beneath them felt damp. Sticky. Nathan touched the ground, and his fingers came away red. Blood. Lila staggered back. "Oh my God!" Nathan forced himself to look down. A faint imprint marred the ground where he had fallen, a soldier's body. His body had fit perfectly inside it, as if he had lain there before. As if he had been there when the battle was fought. Lila clutched his arm, dragging him to his feet. "We need to go." "No." They didn't run. They couldn't. Their legs felt leaden, weighed down by something unseen, something that didn't want them to leave. As they stumbled toward the trailhead, Nathan heard it one last time, a whisper, just behind his ear. "You should have died here." They never looked back, and they never returned to Bloody Lane. But every night, Nathan dreams of marching boots, of muskets firing, of a sunken road slick with blood, and in his dreams, he is not a visitor. He is a soldier, and he never makes it out alive. The shadows of Spruce Railroad Trail. The wind whispered through the towering fir trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. The Spruce Railroad Trail wound its way along the northern shore of Lake Crescent, its waters an unnatural shade of blue, deeper than the sky, darker than it should be. Lena adjusted the straps on her backpack, glancing at her boyfriend, Ryan. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. Ryan grinned, the dimming sunlight catching his sharp features. "Come on, Lena. It's just a hike. People do this trail all the time. But not at night." Ryan chuckled and nudged her shoulder. "That's what makes it fun." Lena wasn't so sure. The trail was already infamous for strange occurrences. Whispers in the trees, phantom footsteps, and worst of all, the Lady of the Lake legend. A woman's body had been found preserved in the icy depths decades ago, her flesh eerily rubbery, as if something in the water refused to let her rot. The thought made Lena shudder. They hiked in silence, their footsteps crunching on gravel. The sun dipped lower behind the Olympic Mountains, casting long, creeping shadows. The old railway tunnels loomed ahead, the entrance nothing more than a gaping black mouth carved into the hillside. Lena hesitated. The tunnel stretched for nearly 450 feet, a relic from when the trail was once part of a logging railroad. Time had gnawed at its edges, the walls damp with moisture, the ceiling covered in hanging moss. Ryan pulled out his flashlight. "After you?" Lena swallowed hard and stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly. The air grew thick, damp, and stale, pressing in on her like unseen hands. The sound of their breathing echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the tunnel walls in strange, distorted ways. Halfway through, the flashlight flickered. Ryan smacked it against his palm, but the light sputtered and died. Darkness swallowed them. Lena's pulse pounded in her ears. "Ryan? I'm right here," he said, but his voice came from farther away than it should have. A sudden scuffling sound echoed through the tunnel, like feet shuffling over loose gravel. Lena froze. "Ryan," she whispered. "Who's there?" Ryan's hand found hers in the dark. "It's probably just..." A whisper slid through the tunnel, low and rasping. "Get out." Lena yanked Ryan forward, running blindly. The darkness stretched forever, the tunnel never ending. Panic clawed at her chest. Had the tunnel changed? Was it longer now? Was it swallowing them? Then, suddenly, light. They stumbled out, gasping. The forest was silent, the wind dead. Even the lake, usually shifting in gentle ripples, lay still as a sheet of glass. Ryan turned back to the tunnel, shining his flashlight. The beam barely penetrated the darkness. But there, at the edge of the light, something moved out of shape. A shadow, and then, it stepped forward. A woman. Her skin was gray, her hair floating as if she were still underwater. Her mouth hung slightly open, but her eyes were the worst part. Black pits, endless voids. Lena screamed. The woman lifted one hand, her fingers curling like talons. Ryan grabbed Lena's wrist. "Run!" They tore down the trail, the trees blurring past. Behind them, wet, dragging footsteps followed, each one slow, deliberate, patient. Lena risked a glance over her shoulder. The woman was closer, but she wasn't running, she was gliding. They reached the bridge crossing the lake, the water stretching endlessly below. Ryan skidded to a stop, clutching his chest. Lena spun. Silence. The woman was gone, Just the forest. Just the night. Ryan let out a shaky laugh. Jesus! What the hell was that? Lena shook her head, trying to steady her breathing. I don't know. A sound drifted from the trees. A whisper. A giggle. Then, a splash. Lena turned to the lake, her blood running cold. Something had broken the still surface, ripples spreading outward. A single, pale hand floated just beneath the water. Then it sank, disappearing into the blue-black depths. The lake swallowed it whole. Lena grabbed Ryan's arm, dragging him away. We need to go. Now. They ran without stopping, without looking back. But as they left the spruce railroad trail behind, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't escaped, that something had followed, that something still whispered her name in the wind, and that, one day, the lake would call her back. The locals never spoke about the trail after dark. They'd whisper about it in the daylight, cautioning tourists who wandered too far up the dense, winding path in the rainforest. It was a place of spirits, they said. A place where the restless dead called out, seeking company in their eternal suffering. Kayla didn't believe in ghost stories. As a travel blogger, she had heard them all. Every town, every country had its version of a cursed road, a haunted hotel, or a sinister forest. But none of them had ever stopped her before. So when she heard about the so-called suicide forest trail deep in the Hawaiian jungle, she knew she had to see it for herself. It was nearing dusk when she arrived at the trailhead. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of damp earth filling her lungs as she adjusted her backpack. The trees loomed high above, their gnarled branches intertwined like skeletal fingers against the twilight sky. Signs posted near the entrance warned against hiking alone. Others spoke of the dangers of unstable terrain. But the most unsettling was a small wooden plaque nailed to a post at the entrance, its message carved deep into the wood: turn back. They are waiting, Kayla scoffed and pressed on. The path was narrow, overgrown with thick ferns and creeping vines. With every step, the jungle seemed to swallow her whole, the sounds of civilization fading into the distance. The deeper she ventured, the heavier the air became, pressing against her chest like unseen hands. Then, she heard it: a whisper, faint, like the wind moving through the trees. But it carried something else, a sadness, a plea. Kayla stopped, holding her breath. The rational part of her brain told her it was just the wind, but her gut twisted in unease. Shaking it off, she continued forward, her boots crunching against the damp ground. A mile in, she spotted something strange. A rope, frayed and knotted, hung from a thick tree branch overhead, swaying ever so slightly. Nearby, a tattered shoe lay abandoned, its laces caked in dried mud. Kayla frowned. It could have been left by another hiker, she reasoned. But a gnawing sense of dread crept up her spine. As she raised her camera to take a picture, a chilling gust of wind rustled through the trees. And with it, she heard her name. Kayla! She spun around, heart pounding. No one was there. The jungle stood still, silent, as if it were holding its breath. Goosebumps prickled her skin. She forced a laugh. All right, she muttered to herself. Maybe I should turn back. The path ahead suddenly looked darker, the trees pressing in tighter. Every instinct screamed at her to leave. She turned around, retracing her steps, but something was wrong. The trail didn't look the same. The ferns she had pushed aside earlier were undisturbed. The landmarks she had mentally noted were missing. Her stomach dropped. She was lost. Panic clawed at her throat as she quickened her pace. The jungle felt different now, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. Then she saw it, another rope dangling from a tree. But this one hadn't been there before. A shadow moved in the periphery of her vision. A flicker, just beyond the trees. Kayla froze, her breath coming in short gasps. Slowly, she turned her head. A figure stood between the trees. Its face obscured by the darkness, its body unnaturally still. Then, as if sensing her gaze, it moved, not walking, gliding. Kayla stumbled back, her foot catching on a root. She hit the ground hard, her camera skidding away into the underbrush. The figure loomed closer. A voice, raw with pain, whispered from its unseen mouth. Stay with us. Terror overtook her. Scrambling to her feet, she bolted, branches clawing at her arms as she ran. The jungle blurred around her, the sound of rushing footsteps, no, whispers, chasing her. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get out. Then, suddenly, the trees thinned, and she burst onto the main trail. Gasping, she turned back. Nothing. The jungle was silent. The oppressive weight had lifted, leaving only the sounds of the night insects buzzing in the air. Kayla didn't stop running until she reached her car. Hands shaking, she fumbled with her keys and peeled out of the empty parking lot. Only when she was miles away did she dare glance in the rearview mirror. A pair of dark eyes stared back at her from the back seat. And then they were gone. The Ghost House Trail, Tennessee. The forest was eerily still, as if holding its breath. The towering trees, their branches twisted like skeletal fingers, loomed over the narrow path known as the Ghost House Trail in Tennessee's Big Ridge State Park. A thin mist snaked through the underbrush, curling around the legs of the lone hiker making his way deeper into the woods. Ethan had heard the stories. Everyone in the nearby town had. Tales of the Hutchinson family, who had lived here over a century ago. A family cursed by tragedy, their spirits doomed to wander the land they once called home. The house itself was long gone, burned to the ground after the Civil War, but people claimed that on certain nights, you could still see its ghostly outline and hear the wails of the dead. Ethan wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. He had hiked trails all over the country, and if he'd learned anything, it was that nature was far more terrifying than the supernatural. Wild animals, unpredictable weather, and the ever-present risk of getting lost, that was real fear. Still, something about the Ghost House Trail intrigued him. He had planned this hike as a challenge, a way to prove to himself, and to his growing audience online, that fear was nothing more than a trick of the mind. He adjusted the straps of his backpack and pressed on. As he walked, the trees seemed to close in around him, the path narrowing unnaturally. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. No chirping birds, no rustling leaves, just silence, thick and oppressive. He checked his phone. No signal. Not surprising. He had read that the park's dense forest could interfere with reception. A chill ran down his spine despite the warmth of the afternoon. He shook it off. Then he saw a dot up ahead, just off the main trail. A structure shimmered through the trees. Ethan's breath hitched. There was no mistaking it, a house. Old, rotting, its wooden beams blackened as if scorched by fire, yet still standing. He knew this wasn't possible. The Hutchinson house had burned down. But there it was. He pulled out his camera, his fingers suddenly unsteady. "This is some next-level creepy," he muttered, clicking the record button. "I don't know what I'm looking at, but I swear there's a house here. Locals say it's long gone, but—" A whisper cut through the silence. Ethan spun around. The woods remained empty. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to breathe. "Probably the wind," he murmured, though there was none. He turned back to the house. The front door, hanging loosely on rusted hinges, was slightly open now. Someone had been inside. Or something. "Hello?" he called, stepping forward. The air turned ice cold. His breath misted before him. The whispering returned, louder now, overlapping voices that slithered into his ears like tendrils of smoke. "Leave." Ethan's throat tightened, but he took another step. His camera flickered, the battery indicator flashing red. Impossible. It had been fully charged. Through the cracked doorway, he saw movement, a shadow shifting within. He should leave. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but curiosity and adrenaline kept him rooted. He inched closer, pressing the camera to his eye. Through the lens, he saw her. A woman stood in the doorway, her face a mask of sorrow. Her dress, once white, was now stained with dirt and something darker. Her hollow eyes locked onto his. Ethan stumbled back. His foot caught on an exposed root, and he crashed to the ground. When he looked up, she was gone. The door creaked as it swung fully open, revealing the darkness within. A sharp cry echoed through the woods. It sounded like a child. His breath hitched. The Hutchinsons had a daughter. Mary, the youngest, had died of an unknown illness. Or so the legend claimed. Ethan scrambled to his feet, torn between reason and the undeniable reality before him. His pulse thundered as the whispers turned to screams. The trees trembled, their branches reaching toward him as if alive. Then he heard it, a voice clear as day. "You shouldn't be here." The woman was back, standing just inside the doorway. Tears streaked her dirt-covered face. Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He felt something tugging at his wrist. He looked down. A small hand, icy cold and possibly real, gripped him. "Mary." His scream never left his throat. The world blurred, and the ground beneath him disappeared. He was falling, no, sinking, into darkness. The last thing he saw was the woman, her lips forming silent words. "Run." Then everything went black. The rescue when Ethan came to, he was lying on the side of the trail, his head pounding. The sun had dipped below the trees, casting long shadows. A ranger stood over him, his face lined with concern. "You okay, son? You're lucky we found you. Hikers go missing out here all the time." Ethan sat up, his body aching. His camera was gone. "There was a house," he croaked. "And a woman." The ranger's expression darkened. "Ain't no house here. Not anymore. But folks see things. Hear things." He hesitated before adding, "You're not the first." Ethan's skin prickled. He knew what he had seen, what he had felt. As he got to his feet, he glanced back toward the trail. The mist had returned, curling through the trees like ghostly fingers. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter echoed through the woods. This time, Ethan didn't stay to investigate. He ran. Hiking can be a gateway to the soul, a way to connect with nature. But sometimes the trails lead somewhere far darker than expected. Whether it's the spirits of those lost to history or something more sinister, these haunted hikes remind us that not every path should be traveled. If you ever find yourself on one of these trails and feel like you're not alone, maybe you aren't. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Have you ever had a paranormal experience on a hike? Tell us in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and stay on the trail.